kind of random.
What up, y'all? I am your host, Vegas of Hip Hop Now Podcast, and this is another bonus episode. Shout out to the patrons at patreon.com/hiphopnow and all of those that support the podcast in various ways. But most importantly, share this podcast with people you know enjoy this kind of content. It's just that easy. So as I was thinking of what to do for this month as far as a bonus episode is concerned, it became really clear what to do. It's the thing that we see when we're on social media all the time, and sometimes we spend, way too much time arguing about it. Let's just get right into it. The word classic. Definition: of the first or highest quality, class, or rank. Definition 2, serving as a standard, model, or guide. Now, when you hear that, right, when you hear those definitions of classic, obviously we thinking in the realm of hip hop, of the first or highest quality, class, or rank, serving as a standard, model, or guide. Now, that's the implications of what that word means that word is special. That means that word is original. That word is not to be given out lightly. Like if the album you're referring to doesn't personify these qualities, the highest quality, class or rank, a standard, a model, or a guide, then it's not a classic. Now, some people would just feel like, I like it a lot though, so it's a classic, right? But not necessarily, right? Sure, music is subjective, art is subjective. It's all what we hear and see and how much, it attracts us, through the lyrics, through the beats, through the concept. But when you say something is of the highest quality or class or rank, that's a certain standard, like we said it in the definition. That is above what you like. Now, as it applies to hip hop, when it comes to classics, in order for somebody to even argue with a group of other hip hop heads that something definitely is a classic, if you ask me, it's something that should be universally accepted as a classic. It shouldn't be, well, I think it's a classic, or me and my boys think it's a classic, or me and my state think it's a classic, or my city. It has to be universally accepted that it's a classic album. We can go as far back as Paid in Full with Eric B. and Rakim. Universally accepted that that's a classic album. Great Adventures of Slick Rick, Straight Outta Compton, Illmatic, Ready to Die, right? Wu-Tang, Into the 36 Chambers, right? Good Kid, Mad City, right? I feel comfortable saying that, right? Albums that if you heard someone say it was just alright, they were in the minority, right? And I think sometimes with social media, because you can find yourself in sections of the fandom as far as who you choose to follow and who choose to follow you, a lot of times you'll just have a lot of like-minded people. A lot of times, right? If you are the type of person that will micromanage your friends list or your follow list. And that's why sometimes, like, I've seen people say this, and I think it's a pretty dope line. I've never heard that outside of Twitter or outside of social media. And I love that. You know why? Because that is the real world. Outside of social media is the real world. And it's about what have you generally heard, right? It's not just you and your friends and your city. It's also what's happening on the radio, what's on the videos. It's when something is everywhere. When Nothing But a G Thing, the single, came out and the Chronic album came out, it was in heavy rotation everywhere. I was in New York on the East Coast. So if it was on heavy rotation on the radio and on the videos I watched, I know it was like that in Cali, and I know it was like that in some other places. And people generally felt the same about it, as far as in the media and everything. So no, the word classic is not a word to be thrown around and, bestowed upon your favorite rapper just because they're your favorite rapper. It's special. It's the highest quality. It's a class. It's a standard. It's a rank. It's a motto. It's a guide. It means that these groups of albums are above the rest. Everything can't be up there, and I think that's what some people don't get. Now, one thing that came to mind when thinking about classics as it relates to hip hop was the fact that there's so many albums that if I mentioned them to hip hop heads, we would all agree that these are classics. Obviously, there are some that some people may not feel that way, but universally, there are certain albums that we will instantly say they're classics. But then I had to ask myself one time, when is the last time I listened to that album? And does that disqualify it as a classic? Because me as a hip hop head never felt the need to go back and listen to it, in the past couple of years, depending on when's the last time I heard it. Is that a problem? How about when I do go back and listen to this universally accepted classic album, did it age well? I mean, if it's supposed to be of the highest quality, in a certain class, in a certain rank, a motto and a guide and a standard, it should age well, right? Because it's already good. It should age well. Now, I'd like to believe the answer is always yes, because classic albums to me aren't necessarily about whether something still sounds good in 2020. It's about the context. And most classic albums, especially if you haven't listened to them in years, when you hit play, they already create the context for you because there's a certain level of nostalgia. You remember when this album was the hottest thing out, instantly, as soon as you hit play, as soon as you hear the first intro. But there's just a lot of classic albums that people talk about all the time and haven't heard them in years. Now, me, I own most of the, if not all, of the albums in hip hop that are generally widely accepted as classic albums. I own them because I'm a hip hop fan, and I was there when it was happening. But I'd be lying if I told you that I go back and listen to all of them. I just really don't. Here's one example that I've always said. This is an album that I've always mentioned in podcasts and discussions, and I had realized that I hadn't heard it in years. It Takes a Nation of Millions to Hold Us Back. I listened to it recently in 2020. You know when's the last time I listened to that album in its entirety? Not hearing songs here and there. We all do that. We all hear songs or listen to certain records off of these classic albums. But this was the first time I listened to this album from beginning to end. And it was like, the last time I listened was 20 years ago. And that's being generous, because I think I could think of a moment where I probably did listen to it. But it's been 20 years since I listened to It Takes a Nation of Millions to Hold Us Back. Again, not records off of there, not videos. I've seen those in recent years, obviously. But the entire album, the reason why we call it a classic. And I'm definitely not a person who doesn't go back and listen to old records. I do all the time. I listen to old school hip hop just as much as I listen to new school hip hop, because they're some of my favorite records and they're classics. But I just don't listen to all of them. And I wondered about that. Like, obviously, when I did listen to It Takes a Nation of Millions to Hold Us Back, I felt like, yep, still the classic I remember. But like when you look online, you see a ton of people talking about Illmatic, 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 Illmatic. Then they talking about It Was Written Was better. But when's the last time you listened to Illmatic within its context? Now, some of us, sure. I've listened to Illmatic in recent years, and I've also listened to It Was Written in recent years. But when you just isolate Illmatic, because it's the holy grail of hip-hop, and I'm putting them in air quotes, you gotta come with the context, especially if you're gonna compare it to his follow-up. What was different about Illmatic? What made Illmatic special? What makes it so that people talk about it every day, but don't listen to it every day? It's the context, it's the moment, it's the lack of expectations you had with this rookie MC who was like 19 years old, who all of a sudden has all of the hottest producers in the game at that moment wanted to work with him on his debut album. There was no expectations. You just knew something big was happening. And then when you got it, it was more than you can have hope for. That's the context of Illmatic. All of those variables. So when you go back and listen, now you need to be in that moment. And then when you go listen to It Was Written, you got to realize this is the follow-up to that album. So what's the difference? Well, there's way more expectations at this point. I mean, Illmatic was everything when it came out. And now here's a follow-up album. So the expectations are through the roof for every hip-hop fan. And some were satisfied and some weren't. You know, there are some people who didn't like it because it was so different. But that's what I mean. You can't really say one is better than the other, or one is a classic and one isn't, through comparisons. But it's hard to remember when you're not listening to it, even though you will, without a doubt, call it a classic. There's so many examples of that. Like, I'm one that will call Get Rich or Die Trying a classic. Mainly because of the anticipation, the hype going in, how many hits he had. 50 Cent was on fire in the streets and on radio. And for him to drop that album, and generally it was accepted that that album was crazy and it met expectations. With all that context, it is literally a classic. Now, when you go back and listen, yeah, that music represents the beats and everything, represents a specific time that doesn't always sound as great in 2020, but then you're taking it out of context. This didn't come out in 2020. This came out in, 2003 or whatever? Early 2000s. So I wanted to focus on the word classic and the fact that there are just a number of hip-hop classics that I haven't listened to in years. I couldn't even tell you the last time I heard Paid in Full from beginning to end. Sure, I've listened to Best of Eric B. and Rakim's, and some of those records land on there. I've heard, Eric B. is President a million times, and Paid in Full a million times in recent years. But when's the last time I just said, I'm going to listen to this album? Run DMC's Raising Hell. I'm going to listen to this album. I'm not going to skip over to no single records or whatever. I'm going to listen to the entire album. So I say to you, the listener of this bonus podcast, what albums that are generally accepted as classic albums, and you feel that way too, have you heard them since they dropped? Have you heard them in recent years? I mentioned Good Kid, Mad City earlier. I don't remember the last time I listened to that in its entirety. I've listened to Swimming Pools and Money Trees and all kinds of records off of it. But when's the last time I hit play from beginning to end? Does that say something about that album? No. But I think we have a tendency to do that with the music because we have to move on and there's more out, and we kind of put our stamp on what we feel that album was when it dropped. and we kind of move on. And some of us, like myself, will go back and listen to those albums. And some albums I go back and listen to aren't considered classics. I just like them a lot. So let me know what you think. Do you feel like using the word classic should be reserved for albums that meet that definition of the highest quality, of being the standard for other artists and other works of art in the hip-hop field? Leave your comments in the comment section below. Also know that you can follow me at Vegas World INC. That's on Instagram and Twitter. And please know to share this podcast, again, with people you know enjoy this kind of content. Until next time, y'all, I am not a critic. I'm a fan. Peace.
Drop it on the random.